If I told you a city is announcing a $100 million investment into cycling infrastructure, what city would you guess? Toronto, Vancouver, Boston, Montreal? Well, you're wrong. It is Edmonton, yes. Car dependent, oil money Edmonton is investing $100 million into bike lanes, one of the largest investments of its kind this side of the globe. I mean, bike lanes can be a touchy subject for many motorists, so how did a place like Edmonton, that is full of them, get an investment this large for bike infrastructure? Is it too much money? What can any other city learn from this? Who in the right mind would ride their bike in a place where -10 is considered to be a warm winter day? What is happening here? Hi, my name is Tosan. I'm here to tell you all about the stories behind our built environment that changes our lives. And right now, we're talking about Edmonton committing $100 million towards bike lanes. We're going to discuss why and how a city like Edmonton got such a relatively large investment into bike infrastructure, and what can other cities learn from it. There's nothing on the surface that makes Edmonton particularly unique. That's why we wanted to dive deep into this, because if Edmonton could pull this off, then I really believe that most cities in the US and Canada could pull it off as well. For some people who even hear the term bike lanes, it gives them almost a visceral response. And if that's you, then good on you for watching a video this long about them. But there has always been a tension between motorists and cyclists. And for some, $100 million is just an absurd amount of money for what is essentially, just to them, a hobby. Especially in a city that can get as cold as -30. Whereas for others, $100 million is not nearly enough to make up for the decades of neglect that has happened to cycling infrastructure. There's varying opinions on this. However, attitudes are changing. Cycling has now moved from being seen as a mere nuisance to motorists to something that should now be considered and taken seriously by many. That's the reason why I bought my bike. I've bought bikes before in the past, but I just never really used them. I thought since the city's making an investment in bike infrastructure, I should too. And so I decided to get a new bike this time. But this time, it was an e-bike. Right now is the perfect time for the city to invest in cycling infrastructure, as the technology is here for people to take fully advantage of it. E-bikes are awesome. They've opened up bike lanes to so many different people that wouldn't have otherwise considered it. The e-bike market has exploded over recent years, and the growth is not slowing down anytime soon. The size of the e-bike market in Canada in 2023 was $1.34 billion and is projected to grow to $2.87 billion by 2030. I think it's safe to say that e-bikes are here to stay. E-bikes are making cycling more accessible to everyone, especially those who typically aren't into cycling. It may be because of several reasons. They may not be physically able to do so due to a disability or age, or people who choose not to cycle the old school way just because it wasn't appealing to them. I typically fell into that later camp. You see, I didn't mind riding my bike if I was looking for a workout, but it just was not practical for me for a commute or running errands, since I would have to shower every single time I used my bike. This might be TMI, but I'm a sweaty guy, and that alone was a reason that put me off from cycling.
Hey man, thanks for coming out and helping me move. I really appreciate it. I know how far the drive was, so I appreciate it a lot.
Don't even worry about it. I didn't even drive here, so you don't have to worry about that.
Well, I got evicted and my dad died and my cat is in the hospital. And is that your bike out there? Did you bike here? Are you gonna be able to help me move?
Me? I'm fine. I can still help you move. E-bikes solved one of the biggest factors that held me back. And I think it held a lot of people back with the strenuous effort associated with bikes. And it just makes cycling that much more practical. It's also an affordable way of reaping the awesome benefits of electric power, especially when compared to electric or gas vehicles. The cost of charging an e-bike is $24.43 a year. Not a month, a year. Hundreds of times cheaper than gas. E-bikes are also much better than electric cars because you don't need anywhere near as much material to make the battery. One electric car corresponds to an average of 130 e-bikes in terms of cell quantity. 130. So instead of a electric vehicle moving a max of 5, maybe 6 people, that same battery could be moving 130 people on their own e-bike. 130. These batteries are the most environmentally damaging part of most electronic devices, and in this case, electric vehicles. Minerals such as cobalt are extracted from the land in some of the most impoverished places on Earth, such as the Congo. Men, women, and children mine minerals from the earth using a practice called artisanal mining. Though it sounds like a fun excursion for the same people that would buy live, love, laugh pillows at a farmer's market, it is not something I'm gonna wish on my worst enemy. Yes, electric cars are better for the environment in the long term, especially when compared to the internal combustion counterparts. That's good, but using less resources is better. Especially when those resources are precious minerals, since the social and environmental cost is so high. E-bikes are better for the environment, they're better for your wallet, and they're a blast to ride. But I still don't really use my bike. So selfishly, I hope by doing this deep dive, I can figure out why I don't use my bike. I hope by spending an obsessive amount of time about researching the history of bike infrastructure within Canada and the US, it will give me the answers I'm looking for. In the first episode, we discussed the prevalence of car dependency within North America. The idea that cars within cities dominate the urban landscape. This is the context that cycling has had to exist in. Space outside of buildings is presumed to be for cars and cars only. So that just kind of gives us the context. But for us to fully understand, let's go back in history to see even how we got here in the first place. You see, before the late 1800s, bicycles looked like this. Yes, they really look like that. If that to you looks unsafe, you're right. Due to the center of gravity being so high and in front of the wheel, falling head over the handlebars was a common occurrence. This led to the arrival of the safety bike, which is pretty much the bike that we have here today. This took something that would have not looked out of place at the circus and turned it into something actually functional. When this came out, it changed the game. I mean, it was still expensive. It was a new technology, almost $3,000 in today's money, but it was catching on since it was far cheaper than using a horse and carriage, which was what people were typically using at the time. Urban professionals such as doctors, lawyers, realtors bought these in droves. It was a practical way of getting them to places where the streetcars of the time could not reach. Bikes were not just utilitarian, but owning a bike was seen as a progressive status symbol. It was the electric vehicle of its time. Like most trends associated with the upper class, they could not just ride their bikes and call it a day. There were cycling clubs all over the US and Canada that had membership fees that cost just as much as the bike that people were expected to pay every single year. So owning the bike was something for the wealthy elite, not for the average person. However, by the early 1900s, mass production had reduced the price of the bike by 1/3. And just as the working class people were beginning to get a taste of the joy of riding their bike, the automobile was gaining its prominence. And again, if you saw the first episode, you already know what happened next. The car-dependent infrastructure, which we have all become accustomed to, was now here, making it difficult for the working class to use bikes since vehicles were dominating the scene. And not much has changed since then. The US and Canada has always forced cyclists to use the same infrastructure that cars used. Very few places that were safe and functional for cyclists. Rather than having a place separated from traffic to cycle, cyclists were expected to ride amongst vehicles. There's actually a term for this called vehicular cycling, an idea that was popularized by John Forrester.
So in the 1970s, this guy named John Forrester wrote a book called Vehicular Cycling. And he had this whole theory about how cyclists should interact with automobiles on the street. And his philosophy was that people on bikes should be treated as vehicles, and they have equal rights to the road. They should be given equal space. And if everyone rode with respect and confidence and drove that way, then there should be no problem with bikes and cars interacting. And this was the predominant way of thinking at the time, and which is why there was no bike lanes, which is why you've got laws in place treating bicycles as motor vehicles. It seemed so insane that we ever thought this idea of vehicular cycling would work. It had 30 years of trying, and the result was that there are a handful of people riding bikes, because riding your bike with cars is terrifying, and people don't want to do it because they're scared.
Tom just explained we are decades behind where we need to be when it comes to cycling infrastructure. This is because as long as bikes just behave like vehicles, people thought that would be sufficient. In fact, people thought it would be more preferable than actually building bike lanes. Cyclists should just share the road with vehicles that can weigh up to 20 times more than them and go 4 times faster. Tell me how that makes any sense. Of course, this led to the predictable situation that only the most dedicated and thrill-seeking people were deciding to ride amongst traffic, and everyone else chose to drive because not everyone's built like an extreme sport athlete. Cycling was not a transportation option that was accessible to everybody. Even right now, it's only accessible to those who dare to do it, which sounds more like a catchphrase for one of those pop-up carnival rides than a legitimate transportation method provided by the government. You know those carnival rides that turn up in the middle of nowhere? Like one day it's a parking lot and the next day it's a rickety roller coaster put up by a guy who has a vehicle with no license plates on it. I had to do that little history lesson to illustrate the cultural implications of this. If you're in an environment that is hostile to a form of transportation, nobody will use it. Anyways, all of this just reinforced the idea that the streets are for cars and everything else second. With rising transportation costs, environmental concerns, increased congestion, and the growing awareness about physical health, people are demanding alternatives to moving around their city. There is still so much more to this story. Again, how did a place like Edmonton, which was, remember, literally the car dependency poster child of which most American cities were inspired by, is now attempting to do the same for cycling infrastructure? Before we move on, I want to take the opportunity to mention some of the legitimate concerns people have when it comes to bike lanes or cyclists. So let's talk about money. Amidst tax hikes and inflation, making sure our tax dollars are going towards things that are worthwhile is important. In fact, it's more important than ever before. So I sat down with the city councillor, Michael Jans, who was a strong proponent for this investment, his opinion on this, and here's what he had to say.
You know what's crazy? In the same time span, though, we're spending that $100 million on bike lanes. We're spending $4.2 billion, $4.2 billion on cars, on road infrastructure. So still, even that small investment is still not even crumbs. It's not even a percent of a percent. It's so infinitesimal.
Obviously, spending more money on vehicle infrastructure makes sense. There are far more drivers and roads to maintain. But $100 million on bike infrastructure is just a rounding error compared to how much we spend on vehicle infrastructure. This investment in bikes, that is going to go a long way to reduce the transportation costs for residents, as it gives them a legitimate choice to use a low-cost way of moving around. Whereas you really can't say the same for car infrastructure. I mean, do you really think gas prices are going down anytime soon? Winter, of course, is a legitimate concern, so we're going to take a look into that as well. I'll start with this. I'm the biggest wimp when it comes to the cold. I promise you. If you know somebody who hates the cold, I hate it more. I scream when I'm in the cold. The cold literally saps joy from my life. I hate the cold more than anyone else. I rode my bike a few times during this winter to see if, riding the bike in winter is actually like a doable thing. And I realized if you handle these two things, cycling in winter really isn't that bad. Winter brings two things that, could stop people from cycling. The temperature and road conditions. So we're going to start with temperature. Edmonton can get cold as -40 with wind chill, which is incredibly cold, and I don't expect anybody to be out during that time. At least I will not be out. But the average temperature during the coldest months is about January to February is -14, which I know sounds crazy to people in Edmonton because I know it often seems cold in that. But those bitterly cold -40 days make up a relatively small portion of what most days are like in the winter. You don't have to cycle during those freezing cold days anyways. Most of the time, the temperature will be way more manageable than you would even think it would be. You gotta understand, once you're also riding your bike, you're also generating a lot of heat. So as long as you wear gloves, throw on a jacket, throw on a toque, you're going to be okay. If I can put up with it, and I promise, again, I'm the biggest wimp when it comes to the cold, I think most people could put up with it as well. Road conditions. Road conditions in winter brings icy and snowy roads that can be difficult to navigate. The solution to this is that you just maintain the bike path like you do with any road. The point I'm making is that riding your bike in winter is not a logistical issue, it's a cultural one. Edmonton is not the only city in the world with cold temperatures. Other cities have figured this out. I mean, look at Oulu, a town in which many people cycle a year round because when you provide it as a reasonable option, people actually use it. They have good signage and the bike paths are well maintained with grit, so winter tires are not even needed. Up to 50% of school children ride their bikes throughout winter. So I mean, if school-age children can ride their bikes during winter, I'm sure you could do it too. I wanted to also address the concern around the impact bike lanes have on businesses, which is pretty good. Several studies indicate that foot traffic and retail sales increase once bike lanes are installed. So for the most part, bike lanes seem to be very good for businesses in the long run, which intuitively kind of makes sense when you think about it. The follower more likely to stop on a whim at a store or even notice the store is even there than when you're in a steel and glass cocoon traveling 60 to 70 kilometers an hour down that same road. It kind of makes sense why people would be more inclined to spend money and shop and to patronize their businesses in their neighborhood if they're walking and biking around that same neighborhood. Bike lanes are just good for business. But however, I'm not a business owner, so I didn't want to speak to those who are within that community to determine their perspectives on bike lanes. This is Ali Goulet, owner of the bar and restaurant Rising Tides in Calgary, and she mentioned how bike lanes being installed in her neighborhood was actually a positive for her.
Having it just be one continuous path that's dedicated for bikes means we get tons of bike traffic, and I think it just makes it a lot more appealing to ride there because you're like, oh, I can just get on my bike and then I get off my bike and I'm there, and there's no point where I have to kind of navigate anything that's unsafe or anything like that. So yeah, I saw them as huge pluses.
However, she did mention some inconveniences associated with having bike lanes installed.
Being a queer space that is serving all of Calgary because of, the fact that there's not really anything else out there like us, means that inherently people are going to be traveling from every quadrant of the city to come there. Yeah, and I've heard, there was times I've heard people come in and say, oh, the parking was so horrible. I couldn't find parking for 10 minutes. I've heard people say, I don't want to come back. I have heard that. And that's tough.
Of course, that is something that no business owner wants to hear. But I think that it's important that we look at all sides of this story and not just focus on all the positives around bike lanes. And if somebody is expecting to park their car right next to a building where everywhere they go, there's going to be pushbacks when changes are made. I also wanted to speak with Punita McBride with Edmonton's Downtown Business Association. I asked her what the business owners downtown thought, and she actually echoed a lot of the same thoughts and sentiments that Ali had.
There was a lot of pushback, in the early days of building our bike lane network downtown. It was obviously long before my time here. I lived downtown at the time, and it was so exciting as a resident to have bike lane, options that were protected, semi-protected. Especially the types of business owners we have now. It's a younger demographic. It's entrepreneurial people, and they are urban-minded generally. And so I think a lot of that resistance has started to fall away. There's absolutely still people I talk to on a daily basis who the first thing they want to scream about is bike lanes. Yeah. But generally, they're not street front businesses. They don't have that day-to-day understanding of how people move around and where their customers are coming from, and how much more attracted a lot of people are to a place where they can bike to or walk to really easily.
I think that change is difficult, even if it's for the better in the long run. Both Punita and Ali were big supporters of bike lanes, but they both had to manage the growing pains that come with it. At times, looking just at the data, you can miss the human element. Yes, bike lanes are good, but it does not mean putting them in is simple. There's going to be a time of an uncomfortable adjustment period where people who have never even cycled before now need to consider or may have to adjust their behavior to accommodate cyclists. Punita mentioned something that really stuck out to me.
So I think having groups who don't have the trust of the businesses on a street try and do it isn't quite the same as if you have a relationship. They know what your intentions are. They know you have their best interests in mind, as well as the public's. And I think that's where we've had some really great success.
Developing relationships with any community that you're planning on implementing a change is an integral part of the process. It's so that they can be informed and be part of the solution of putting in those bike lanes so they can stick with it even when difficulty and speed bumps inevitably arise during the new implementation of a project like a bike lane. Communication and relationship building is an important and unsung part of city building. This isn't just buildings that we're putting up or bike lanes that we're laying down. These are things that are changing people's neighborhoods, areas and spaces that they love. We need to make sure that if we're advocating for any change, even if it is for the better, that we do it with consideration and care. And I really think that people like Punita and Ali and everyone else that's, has been on the show so far has definitely had that mentality going into things, because making sure that you have those strong human relationships is pretty much the best way to guarantee that any change that gets put in is a success and isn't just some bureaucrat sitting behind a computer screen making decisions on people's behalf. Hopefully I addressed most of your concerns when it comes to bike lanes, but I want to take the opportunity to actually get into how does a place like Edmonton even get enough community support while investing $100 million in bike lanes is actually a reality. Edmonton has always had a biking community that has been advocating for proper cycling infrastructure. Bike Edmonton, for example, was established in the 90s, but bike infrastructure has historically been sparse in Edmonton. The death of a 21-year-old seemed to be the inflection point for many of the decision makers in the city.
A student at Scona High School named Isaac Cornelson, who was killed on White Avenue, was riding his bike and was pulled under a truck and killed. I think that tragic death is one of the reasons why we have the 83rd Ave bike lane. I think that really dissipated a lot of the resistance in the community who actually saw this as, yes, this is life and death. We do need to get people onto safe infrastructure, and it added urgency to it.
City infrastructure failed him, leading to an outcry and a demand for change within the community. During the following year, a new mayor entered the scene that seemed to be more progressive than his predecessor, an urbanist that would take the bus to campaign events. He was younger and outside the establishment, but he seemed to represent what the city was becoming. Edmonton was and still is experiencing a massive population boom, and he knew that the challenges that would come with it would require a new approach. Elected at just 33, Dawn Iverson won 62% of the vote, with the next person winning 19%. So clearly the majority of people were buying into his vision of what Edmonton could be. That vision has manifested itself into many of the urban planning initiatives that's put Edmonton ahead of the pack when it comes to most cities in North America. However, at the time, he was frustrated with the slow progress of the bike lane network. In fact, the government had just spent millions to remove 4 existing bike lanes, though the mayor and only one other councillor voted against this at the time. However, he is just one guy, just one vote on council, and he was struggling to get buy-in from other stakeholders to make any real investments happen. So dejected, he went to the press and told them the expansion to bike lanes may never happen at all.
Some people might run on some ideas that they're really passionate about, but if those ideas aren't getting some drive from the community or some push from the community, it's kind of hard to come in, especially when you're 1 vote out of 13, and make that change happen. You have to point outside of City Hall and say, people support this. I think then the ball's back in the community's court, and we need to kind of develop some of that broader support for that kind of infrastructure to at least try it out. And so then the community, I think, tries to work together to be positive, be productive, propose a solution, and give each other a bit of grace when it might not work out completely well, so that we still want to work together going forward as we.
That's Stephen with Pass for People, an active transportation advocacy group that, among other organizations, played a key role in what happened next. Due to efforts of the community, a feasibility study was conducted by an engineering firm at half the price to determine if a bike lane network downtown would even be worth it in the first place. The process of getting this downtown bike network installed was a rather unique one. Rather than having hearing after hearing after hearing discussing the theoretical issues that a bike lane may cause, they actually got the bike lanes in as a pilot project.
Instead of just waiting for something to happen, we just need to do it and have a proof of concept. And instead of just creating little bits and pieces here and there, right, that wouldn't connect people fully and to sort of travel with ease and convenience, they actually just installed the cheapest bike network, on the, fairly quick and easy with not a lot of investment. And the priority was just making sure that it was contiguous. And so that was really exciting because instead of having sort of, a bike network downtown that was 25%, they did the full 100% so people could see the value and how it can actually work. And instead of creating, permanent bollards, they put some curbs, they put some planters in certain places.
That way it could be adjusted on the fly to any issues that may arise, and people actually got out there and use the bike lanes than it just being another project sitting on the shelf being mired in bureaucracy. Also, it probably didn't hurt that Edmonton's provincial rival, Calgary, also had a downtown network installed around the same time. Nothing like good old competition to get people's butts kicked into gear. Edmonton got this downtown bike network and it added momentum, and it showed people a glimpse of what a comprehensive bike network could be. All this led to this current moment. All the momentum, all the work of all these community members and stakeholders and everybody working together to make sure that people got the bike lanes they needed led to this point. $100 million being invested in bike lanes. So what does Edmonton plan to do with all that money? Improving wayfinding and signage so cyclists can more easily navigate the bike lanes, which of course makes sense in a city that's going to have several more cyclists who are new to navigating bike lanes. Improving maintenance and better integration with transit systems.
One of the things that stopped me from taking my bike out as much as I would have hoped is the fact that I felt like I had to cycle the entire day. Every time I left my house with my bike, I felt like no matter the weather, no matter the circumstances, no matter if I didn't feel like cycling anymore, I had to cycle on the way back home. Especially for somebody who's getting new to cycling, that doesn't have the strength, the time, the energy, or the patience to deal with it. Having a get out of jail free card essentially, when I didn't feel like cycling as much as I would have liked, would have been awesome. And the fact that the LRT can provide that is a really great option. Particularly the Valley Line, you can bike here, hop on the LRT, and then head down to the south side of Edmonton, bike around, hop on the LRT, and go back home. It's really about flexibility and choice. Choose how you want to move around your city. And the LRT definitely helps accomplish that.
Oh, how could I forget? To build more bike lanes, of course. To expand and improve upon the existing bike lane network into one that's actually safe and gets people where they want to go. A cycling network that is accessible to everyone and not just the daredevils and spandex is incredibly important. A safe bike lane network, or one that is low stress, keeps traffic and cyclists as separate as possible, which will be a big upgrade from the bike gutters that only protect cyclists with paint on the road. In cities with strong cycling infrastructure, it's very common to see children and the elderly using bike lanes, because say it with me now, bike lanes are for everyone. I spoke with Tracy with Ever Active Schools, which is a registered national charity designed to create and support healthy school communities, about a cycling clinic that they run for school-age children. And she had this to say.
Some of the best moments I've had in my life have been part of those city cycling clinics. So basically it's a day-long clinic. The kids go through, a bike maintenance check with a certified mechanic. They do some skill building. All of those children and youth who are part of that day, how to navigate their own communities, right? And like many times we get to go downtown. So I love the instructors that we have, and the instructors that we bring on board are all CAN Bike 4 trained, and they are the loveliest people who are advocates for cycling. They want to share the joy that they have felt all of their lives cycling with these kids. So at the end of those days, we asked the survey, of course, and we asked the students and families how it went. It's so for many, it's this is the best day of my life. I have felt free. I can't believe I was allowed to bike downtown Edmonton. It was amazing. And they are so empowered. And I hear from parents and caregivers after weeks, sometimes years after, and it's I cannot believe the impact that this program had, a one-day program had on just that excitement around cycling. So that's what we want to do. We want to introduce it in such a positive way that they're always going to remember it with a positive feeling.
These kids get to experience the freedom and fun that can come with active transportation by allowing them to imagine a city in which that fun and freedom is accessible to them. I remember growing up in a suburb close to Edmonton and feeling trapped because I couldn't go anywhere without my parents driving me. Having a city with well-connected bike infrastructure could have provided me and my friends the independence we craved. Often we take for granted our freedom our mobility can give us. By providing choice to decide how we move, it empowers everyone, especially those whose needs have historically been neglected. This goes far beyond bike lanes or transit. Over the last several episodes, we have really honed in on movement around our city. And I wanted to focus on this because moving from point A to point B is often the most tangible way we interact with the built environment. We spend a lot of time commuting, running errands, usually in a car, and that is often because it's the only option. For many, it's truly an unpleasant experience with negative health implications. By providing alternatives to the car-dependent sprawl, we'll give more people more choice to travel the best way that they see fit. Many of those choices have little downsides. Transit is more cost-effective and when implemented properly can often be a more pleasant experience. You're essentially being chauffeured around and you can use that time to read, watch a movie, reconnect with loved ones, or do nothing at all. You have the opportunity to interact with the community on a regular basis by bumping into familiar faces on the bus or the subway. The gentle reminder that you're not completely alone. Bike lanes have provided an active alternative to the sedentary lifestyle that car dependency has promoted. Not through a regimented time-consuming workout plan, but through their day-to-day life. Not to mention that riding a bike is fun, and that's a real benefit worth mentioning. Cycling is good for the mind and body, and that is something that anybody can benefit from. I haven't even brought up the fact that both of these methods are good for the environment and drastically reduce our carbon footprint. With the droughts, warm winters, and forest fires we have been experiencing here in Alberta, not to mention the rest of the world, we need as much help as we can get when it comes to combating the climate crisis. Of course, these ideas around cycling and transit are idealistic. Some of the things I mentioned may take decades to fully realize. I'm aware of that. But I think that future is worth working towards. What is the idealistic future of car infrastructure? No traffic and roads without potholes? We've been working towards that future for decades, and we're no closer to that than when we started. Take a second. Do you really think there will ever be a world with no traffic and perfect roads? That would even be financially viable. I just don't think it's possible. By creating an environment in which taking the bike or bus or combination of both is just as convenient as the car, you create an environment that people's personal interests line up with the interests of the larger community. I mentioned this in a previous episode. I'm not a transit, car, or bike person. I just want to get from A to B. Which reminds me of something that Tom mentioned.
Humans do what's easiest and most convenient, and you live in a place where the easiest, most convenient thing is to drive a car. I spent a lot of time in my early days of doing this asking people, why do you choose to ride a bike? I initially thought their answers were going to be, for climate change, or because I believe in cycling. And that was almost never the answer. The answer was always, it's faster for me to get to work this way, or like, I don't have time to exercise, so I'm going to do it here. Like it was really practical things. Almost nobody rides a bike for ideology, I don't think.
When practicality is in alignment with what's just good for everybody, like how riding a bike is practical and also just good for the environment, you create a city in which positive change is just inevitable. People do things because they're practical, not because of ideology. And that is probably why I'm not riding my bike right now, because it's just not practical. Edmonton is still a place where the car is more convenient. There's several places to store your car, but there's no safe place for me to store my bike. I bought this in part because of ideology. But I hope if Edmonton keeps true to their vision, that pretty soon it'll be a whole lot more practical.
What building bike lanes in communities that don't currently have that kind of infrastructure does is it allows people to see the world a little bit differently and like allows people to experience that world and like derive the positive benefits and be like, oh, things can be different. Like it just doesn't have to be roads everywhere.
Our cities got to this point in part due to a lack of imagination. Things don't have to be this way. You don't have to be confined to your vehicle. You don't need to be confined to your car. And the fact that that is the only choice for many of us is just honestly a failure. It is. It's not right. It isn't. It's not right that we have to spend thousands of dollars a year on insurance, thousands of dollars a year on gas, thousands of dollars upfront for the vehicle. This it just does not have to be this way. It doesn't. I don't think it's fair or wise to force people to travel how they don't want to move. I just think this is all about giving choice, giving people an option to travel in any way that makes the most sense for them. I just think that we should all live in a place that gives us as many answers to the question, how do you want to move around your city?